Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual PlanCayman public consultation meeting for all of the Cayman Islands. My name is Donna Bush, and I'm your moderator here this evening. And this session is being broadcast live on the Cayman Islands government's YouTube channel, as well as your local cable channel and on Facebook Live. We thank you, of course, for being here with us. The purpose of today's consultation is to gather your input and, of course, address your questions related to the planning statement. Your feedback, of course, is very crucial in shaping a sustainable future for our Cayman Islands. We have a packed agenda today, so we'll get started with an overview of the planning statement, followed by a Q&A session where you can submit your questions via YouTube and Facebook Live. You can also send those questions anonymously to slido.com. The code there is 2398832. Again, the code for slido.com is 2398832. Now let me introduce our key speakers and, of course, our panelists this afternoon. Mr. Haroon Pandowi is the Director of Planning as well as the Executive Secretary for the CPA. He's served as the Director of Planning for the Cayman Islands since October of 2010, overseeing long-range and current planning, building control, and professional registration. Now, he aims to enhance the quality of life for residents and visitors by ensuring orderly and dynamic development that protects public health and safety while supporting economic growth. Mr. Pandowi holds a master's in city and regional planning from Rutgers University and an MBA with merit from the University of Liverpool. He's a certified planner with the American Institute of Certified Planners. Next up is Mr. Richard Millam. He is the Planning Officer of Policy and Development. He is in the section of the Planning Department, now a qualified town planner and a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Richard has experience in both private sector and local authority planning policy roles in London, UK. He moved to the Cayman Islands back in 2015, where he joined the Department of Planning in 2018. He served for 3 years as the Historics Programs Manager at the National Trust for the Cayman Islands. Up next is Mr. Handel Whitaker. He's the Deputy Chairman of the Central Planning Authority. He brings an extensive experience in urban planning and development to the panel this afternoon. His insights have been instrumental in shaping the planning policies and strategies for our Cayman Islands. Mr. Whitaker has a background in civil engineering and has served in various capacities with the Planning Authority, contributing significantly to the sustainable development of our communities. All right, first up, we have Mr. Richard Millam. He's going to provide us with an overview of exactly what is happening here today. Mr. Millam.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to those online. Thank you for joining us. So yes, I'm going to give a short presentation that sets the context for the planning statement document. I'll explain the development plan review process that we call PlanCayman, and where the planning statement fits within that, and I'll then outline the next steps for moving forward. So here's a diagram showing the various parts of the development plan, and really the main thing to take from this is that the plan is not one single document. It's made up of a number of elements, from high-level national goals and objectives down to local area-based policies and detailed guidelines. And this really is a key point to make, that the document that we've presented for public consultation, the planning statement, is really just one part of this. The document is not the whole development plan, it's a piece of the overall puzzle. And I'll explain how the different pieces fit together. The PlanCayman process began with the National Planning Framework, the NPF document, in late 2018. And hopefully some of you recall the consultation exercise that took place at the end of that year and into early 2019. And that document represents a broad policy document for the other stages of the development plan. Since that time, a project team has been formed to assist the Central Planning Authority, and last year we began drafting the document that forms the next stage in the plan review. So that then brings us to the planning statement document, and this is the document that we're currently seeking your feedback on. The purpose of the planning statement is to define the zones, the overlays, and the broad policies that will then apply in later stages of the development plan review. So you might think of the planning statement as a mission statement, as it seeks to define and set out top priorities. And there's two very important aspects of the planning statement that I really want to highlight. The first is that it includes the sister islands, Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. And the second is that it establishes the concept of area plans. Now, these plans, which will be the next stage, will be prepared over the coming years. And the idea of area plans is they'll follow the broad national policies, but in a way that is specific, appropriate and relevant to these different areas. When we prepare area plans, that's when we start to apply the zones to the map. So this is where, with the help of the public, we'll determine the most appropriate zoning requirements to meet the needs of different places. Each area plan will therefore involve full public consultation, and we very much want the whole community to be involved continuously in that process. The boundaries shown here, and this is on page 5 of the planning statement document, are indicative, and they've been drawn based on the character of these places. They recognise that the character varies significantly within Cayman, from Georgetown to East End to Little Cayman and so on. And because of this varied character, applying land use zones across the islands at one time doesn't perhaps serve those places adequately. What are appropriate heights, densities, setbacks, etc. for, say, a commercial zone in one area might not be appropriate in another. So as each area plan is prepared, with public input and feedback, and the zones are applied to the map, different requirements, restrictions and regulations can be introduced to help achieve the vision for those places. So coming back to the planning statement, this relatively short document has been prepared based on the policies that we established in the National Planning Framework, but uses the structure of the existing 1997 planning statement. Section 1 of the document provides some background information and sets out the development plan structure, how the different documents fit together. It then sets out a vision and a set of objectives which all seek to balance social, environmental and economic considerations, and to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This sustainable development objective therefore runs throughout the planning statement. Section 2 is titled The Challenges and Opportunities We Face, and this helps to explain why the document and why the whole development plan process is so important. The development plan relates to such a range of issues, from the quality of the natural environment to the availability of housing at all income levels, from supporting a successful economy to responding to climate change, improving transportation, meeting demands for infrastructure and public spaces for recreation. These things all have to be considered to ensure that we maintain high quality of life standards. Section 3, which is page 11 onwards, defines the various planning zones and explains why we have them and what their main purpose is. These zones follow a somewhat familiar format to the existing land use zones that we currently work with. They're listed here to the right of the screen. But there are some key changes and additions, and just to summarise, or just to run through those briefly, we've introduced an agricultural zone, which replaces the current agricultural residential zone. We've introduced an estate residential zone, which provides for large lot single-family residences outside of urban areas. There's a new single-family residential zone for locations on the periphery of urban areas. There's a new transit industrial zone, which allows for transit operations such as ports and airports and their associated services. We've separated education and civic zones to better define the locations for these community uses. There's a new resort residential zone to provide a transition between tourism zones and residential areas. And lastly, a new community open space zone, which would contain privately owned spaces that may provide active or passive recreation. And so these zones all serve to provide clear rules on what may or may not be permitted in different areas. And this would give more certainty to landowners and neighbouring residents. Section 4 of the planning statement sets out the different overlay zones, and these are for situations where there are special circumstances that require additional considerations beyond those of the underlying zoning. This includes the introduction of a number of new overlays, the first of which is the Natural Resource Preservation Overlay. And this provides a way of ensuring that development is sensitive to natural resources by applying additional development standards or mitigation measures as necessary. And in some situations, certain elements of the natural resource may be recommended for protection from development. There's also an airport approach overlay, which would ensure safe and appropriate land uses within the approaches of airports. A heritage preservation overlay, which is an update to the existing historic overlay. Fourthly, a land subject to acquisition overlay, which establishes a method to designate property that the government intends to acquire, possibly for roads, public parks, community buildings, etc. And then lastly, we've introduced a sensitive coastline overlay, which seeks to ensure that growth in vulnerable coastal areas, which are defined by risk analysis models, incorporates hazard risk reduction considerations. And this is about minimising threats to human safety, to people's properties, and to the natural environment. And then the last section in the document sets out other policy considerations, and these are additional policies that will be applied regardless of the zone or the overlay for that particular project. These considerations, which are listed here, cover a range of topics and all serve to meet the main objectives of the plan set out previously. So that provides an overview of the planning statement document, and again, we encourage everyone to review the document and provide us with your feedback. The easiest way to do that is to visit PlanCayman.ky, where you can find the document, many supporting materials, and the feedback form. And this is the main way that we're seeking to collect responses. And just to confirm that the consultation period is now open till the 6th of August. It's been extended by 1 week to accommodate the time lost due to the impact of Hurricane Beryl. In terms of taking the document forward post-consultation, once all responses have been received, we would assist the Central Planning Authority in seeking approval to convene a Development Plan Tribunal to consider all objections and representations received. Following the tribunal hearings, a report of amendments would be prepared for consideration, prior to the planning statement being forwarded to Ministry for onward transmission to Cabinet and Parliament for consideration. Ultimately, the planning statement would need to be approved by Parliament, and once that takes place, we're in a position to commence work on each of the area plans. And so to conclude, I just want to come back to this diagram and just highlight again that the planning statement document is simply a step along the way. It's part of the overall process. It defines the zones and the overlays and other more general considerations, which will be applied on an area-by-area basis in later stages. So at this point, and throughout the development of this development plan, we need your input, we need your knowledge and your views to help us create these documents. We need to have in place a better set of tools with more evidence and more teeth that can help us with decision making in the future. So thank you for attending online, and we appreciate your input and being part of this process. I hope this has been a useful overview, and I'll turn it back to Donna for questions and comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, for that insightful presentation. Now, before we open the floor for questions, I'd like to, of course, reintroduce our panelists who will be responding to your questions today. They are Mr. Haroon Pandowi, Mr. Richard Milam, and Mr. Handel Whitaker. We're going to ask a few questions of them before we actually open the floor up. Again, if you're joining us via YouTube or Facebook, please go ahead and send your questions via those platforms, as well as you can send questions anonymously to slido.com. You don't have to sign up for the actual app, but the code there is 2398832. That, again, that's 2398832. That's the code for slido.com to send your questions to us. So the first question that I'd like to ask is, why is PlanCayman important? Mr. Handel, would you like to?
Well, Donna, from a CPA standpoint, as you're aware, we've been operating on a development plan now from 1997, and it is definitely obsolete. This new vision will help focus the direction that Cayman needs to go. Having said that, we need involvement from our entire population to get on board of this this vision, that we can make life easier for our older folks and the younger ones to come. I'll put it in this way, why we need people involvement. If you go to a restaurant and the waiter or waitress come and say, well, what do you want to eat? And you say, bring me something. And they bring you a steak. And you go, well, my steak is not the way I want it. That was your fault. You need to be involved so that you can be a part of this great piece of work that a lot of time and competent people has been put into it.
Okay, thank you very much. Other gentlemen like to add to that?
That's
Yeah,
fine.
you good? Okay. So question number 2, Mr. Pandoi, this one goes to you. How will PlanCayman be implemented or put in place?
Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon to everyone. The PlanCayman document will be implemented through a series of area plans. Right now we're looking at about 11 area plans. As Richard said earlier, those plans will specify the details by which how these overriding policies will be implemented on a community level basis. And again, that's what, back to Mr. Handel's point, that's why it's critical and critically important that persons participate in this process, that they bring forward their views, because this ultimately will set the tone and the vision for your community, and not only today, but will set that vision for many years to come. So that's why it's critical that you're part of this process.
Okay. Mr. Milam, how can the community get involved in PlanCayman? I think Mr. Handel did speak about the importance of people getting involved, but how can they get involved? What are the various ways in which they can provide the feedback that is necessary to get this ball continue rolling?
I think the best way is to visit the website, plancayman.ky. There you'll find all of the background documents, obviously the planning statement document that we're consulting on, and right at the very top on the homepage there you'll find a link to the feedback form, and that's the primary way that we're gathering feedback on the planning statement. Outside of that, as I said, each of the area plans, as they're prepared over the coming years, there'll be many more opportunities for consultation. We want people to be continuously involved. So we also have a newsletter sign up that you can put in your email address, and you'll get the updates and find out what the latest is. And we've been really impressed, I think, with the turnout at the public events we've had so far. We've still got, I believe, 4 coming in the coming couple of weeks. So please attend those also and join the discussion.
Okay. I know one of the things, while we wait on questions to come in, one of the questions that's been coming up at all of the meetings is how long is it going to take for this plan to be rolled out, seeing as this is just the first stage of consultation meetings, the first key stage for the planning statement. People want to find out, well, how long is it really, do we envision this really taking to be rolled out and to be completed almost?
Well, Donna, I think possibly to get this done right, you're probably looking after 5 years.
Realistically, yes.
At least the most to really get this rolling ahead. And like I said earlier, this is why it is extremely important for our entire population to come on board, both negative and positive. We need all the feedback that we can possibly get to shape this into something that is viable for all citizens.
And Donna, if I could just tag on to what Mr. Handel says, that rolling process by which we create these area plans will ensure that the plan never becomes stagnant. It's a continual process, a continual updated in a creation process. So our goal and hope is that we never have this time lag where a plan is set in place and sets in place for longer than it's supposed to. Again, it'll be this continual rolling update and growth process.
Okay. Another question has been coming up is persons have questioned whether it's been considered or whether it's going to be part of the plan that each of the Cayman Islands, the plan will be rolled out differently at different times for each one of them, or will it just be one encompassing plan and then it'll be rolled out all together? So.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to the area plan process that we're establishing through this planning statement. So the process for completing the area plans is that we're hopeful we can prepare 2 per year, and so each of those area plans would have the full consultation process, would have to be approved in Parliament. So they're effectively mini development plans, essentially. But that as Mr. Hurian said, would take us 5 years. That's the plan review cycle. And then the benefit of this process is that we can kind of get to the end of that process and really have a look at and see if each of the area plans are performing. Are they kind of adequately serving those communities? And if not, we can revisit them at that stage and make this a continuous process.
Yeah. Okay. And Donna, just to add on what Richard is saying, PlanCayman is not only for Cayman. You know, you got Cayman Brac, you got Little Cayman,
Right.
and you got Grand Cayman. Needless to say, what is good for Cayman is not necessarily good for Cayman Brac. What's good for Cayman Brac is not necessarily good for Little Cayman. So that's why it's important for us to have 3 plans that each island is completely different.
Okay. All right. Can we break it all down though, because this is the planning statement stage, which basically is like your mission statement.
Right.
Right. First stage, but you know everyone comes to the meetings and they're talking already. They've already gone full speed ahead and talking about the mapping and the area zones and that sort of stuff. So if we could just kind of break down the various bits for those who are joining us via various platforms. So what is an area plan? And how is it defined?
You want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. I think I probably covered it slightly in the presentation,
Yes.
but an area plan is when we apply the zones and the overlays to the map. So prior to that, at this point, we're establishing what those zones and what those overlays are in kind of general terms. And then as they're applied to the map for each area, they all have different requirements. So, for example, building heights in a hotel tourism zone in 7 Mile Beach will most likely be different to the building heights in, let's say, East End or Little Cayman. So that gives us the flexibility to really provide a set of rules for future development that serve these different communities in a more appropriate way.
Okay. Again, just a reminder to everyone who is watching that you can send in your questions to us via YouTube, the Cayman Islands Government YouTube channel, as well as the Cayman Islands Government's Facebook Live. As well, you can send questions via Slido. That's an anonymous way to do that. The code for Slido is 2398832. Again, that code is 2398832. Of course, we invite your comments, your questions, your dialogue there. And just a reminder that we're here just to discuss the planning statement only, which again is sort of like a mission statement that you would have for your company, for an organization. So we have another question. How is the zoning map being updated?
Yeah, so the zoning map would be updated on a piece-by-piece process, really. So as each area plan comes forward and we agree the zoning for that area, it updates the overall zoning map. So you might kind of think of it as a patchwork quilt for kind of that interim period as we're working our way through each of the area plans, and then we'll ultimately arrive at a complete zoning map for the 3 islands.
Okay. All right. So again, this is the planning statement stage only. These series of consultation meetings are just for that, which is the first of 3 stages. The second stage, as Mr. Milam pointed out earlier, the next steps are the area zones and then the department planning regulations. So there'll be a series of meetings for you all out there who are listening and watching for each consultation period. So you don't have to rush to kind of get all those other things in that you may be concerned about, because you'll have the opportunity to do that at public meetings that will be announced as each phase goes on. Again, we have with us, if you're just joining us, we have the Deputy Chairman of the CPA that's here with us today, as well as the Director of Planning and the Policy person here, Mr. Richard Milam from the ministry is also here with us today. So, gentlemen, a lot of questions have come up during the meetings that we've had so far. We had one earlier this week in Little Cayman, which was very, very interesting because a lot of people just really talked about the uniqueness of Little Cayman, and they're really pushing together as a group of people who reside over there for periods of time during the year, as well as Caymanians who reside there on a more permanent basis. They seem to be coming together a lot quicker than even the areas that we've gone to beforehand. What are your thoughts on that? And what would you say to those districts that we've already gone to for those meetings? What would you say to those people to kind of, show them how solidarity can work, and how it helps the process, really?
Well, Donna, in all honesty, it just goes to show the love. When you talk about Little Cayman, I was totally impressed with the amount of involvement. And like I said, it just shows the amount of love that they have for the little island, and they want it to stay as is as long as we possibly can. And that same thing comes back to Grand Cayman. You know, I'm from Northside, the district of Northside, and I would urge your people to show the same interest in our district, that we can facilitate what the needs of our little district will be today and for another 10 years down the line. So we need to have everybody's involvement to get this thing going in the direction that we foresee it to go.
Okay. Mr. Hoon, from a planning perspective?
Thanks, Donna. Just tagging on to what Mr. Handel said, the involvement at the community level is what's going to drive an area plan. The original, either the 77 or 97 development plan, were done at a national level, because in our development cycle, we were at a place where we could broad brush approach was appropriate at that time. But as we're developing, as we're evolving as a country, the necessity now for us to get down into a level of detail that's actually going to drive what we as a community want. As you know, back to what Mr. Handel says, one of the things with the area plan is things such as building heights, densities. We've repeatedly, had feedback, and in some areas this is why residents have pushed against having a plan or having zoning, because they felt that broad brush approach was actually going to not give them what the community that they envision for themselves. And that's why we want to get down to that level, so that we understand, and this is why this document sets out the broad criteria, the broad points that need to be considered, so that we can then focus that discussion, and within a community we can say, okay, what are the building heights that you feel are appropriate in your community? That within a community you can have a hotel tourism product if that's what you want in your community, but that hotel tourism product is not necessarily going to be a 10-story building. For instance, in Northside, the residents may say, we wish to have a hotel tourism presence, but we want something that fits more in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. And we can adjust those building heights, we can adjust those densities. We can get into, we can get down to the level of the material used to create parking lots. So it's, there's nothing that says, well, an asphalt has to be used for a parking lot. That might be inappropriate in an area that has a high turnover, but in an area where you want it to blend seamlessly with houses next door, we can look at things such as lighting, the type of pavements that are being used, design, massing, scaling, etc. Nothing's off the table, and that's why I said it's critical that the residents of an area participate in this process.
Okay, all right. Richard, would you like to add anything, or Mr. Handel?
Just very briefly, I mean, that covered it pretty well. I would say thanks to people that have come to the event so far. They've been very well attended. I think we've all been impressed. I think particularly Little Cayman earlier this week, that was, I think the quote was, it's maybe half the resident population. So, thank you to everyone for coming, and we obviously have more in the coming weeks.
Yeah, we have one in East End tonight, as a matter of fact, from 7 to 9, so we'd like to invite everyone out to that meeting at the Civic Center there. Mr. Handel?
Yeah, Donna, we're just going to add, Little Cayman, a lot of people voiced their opinion that tourism is important to all 3 islands. But in Little Cayman, they don't foresee any 10-story buildings. They want 3-story is the highest. And I think for the outer district, Bordentown, East End, North Side, of course we have Morris Tortuga, which is the thing at 5 stories? 7 stories. I think the general feel that that is high enough. More boutique type hotels is more fitting to our environment, and I think people will be a little more acceptable to that than having 10-story buildings. 10-story buildings, yes, is good for 7 Mile Beach, the Georgetown area, but like I said earlier, I think what is good for Georgetown is not necessarily good for Bordentown, Easton, and Northside.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we have a couple of questions. This one asks, can you provide information as to the progress in putting in place public park space or children's playgrounds, as we have a significant lack of them?
I'll take that one. Sure. Yeah. That is a key area, and that's why we created, the open space overlay zone. Because right now the legislation provides for the creation of lands for public purpose, but it stops there. It doesn't drive forward the need to, strategically look at where those areas are being placed, to look at how those areas interact on an individual community basis, how they need to interact on a larger public basis. Because one of the things that, within a community, and again, this is where it's all interlinked. When we look at things such as density, Cayman's development pattern was predicated on, everyone had a backyard, because that was your community, that was your open space. You could run around in your backyard, your friends could come over, that was your community space. Right. But obviously, as we take into account that we need to shift our development pattern, we, as we look to preserve land, to operate in a more sensitively respond to the needs, large lot developments may not be the best way forward for us. And because again, the high amount of land that it utilizes. But as we are looking to increase densities, we want to make sure that we preserve that social fabric of our communities, that we provide park spaces where, a group of kids can get together safely to enjoy outdoor space, that we look at things as multimodal. How can they actually get to that park space without having to be driven there? So that's where the various aspects of the plan, that's where we ask people to consider, okay, where do you want those open spaces to be? How do you want those open spaces to be connected? How do you want those smaller private spaces to interact with larger public spaces?
Okay. The other question, or actually just it is a question. Can you describe how the process works for each area plan in the case of Little Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Grand Cayman, which is first, and how will it be prioritized? I think I may have asked that question a little bit earlier, but maybe just an extended answer on it. Which is first, and how will it be prioritized?
Donna, getting the feedback from the meeting in Little Cayman on Monday night, it is quite reasonable to say that the general population of Little Cayman wants to have their plan kind of implemented yesterday, which I think is reasonable to say. But having said that, there's like the director said, there are certain steps that you have to take. And each district should be taking that same approach as well, to figure out exactly what is best for North Side, what is best for East End, what is best for Bodden Town. And since I'm from the Eastern District, it's important for me to focus on those three districts, and of course, Little Cayman as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So, the people in Little Cayman are real focus. I've got a number of phone calls since Monday on moving the way forward. Committees are being formed so that they can solicit input from everybody.
Okay. All right, Mr.
Donna, if I could just jump on that, and just again to highlight the importance of participating in the development of the planning statement, because that planning statement sets that criteria that we then move to implement on a very specific basis. So again, for us, the planning statement helps to, like the national planning framework, or being part of that national planning framework, we want to have a stage process by which we're changing and we're creating this document, but we also want to ensure we have a focused process. So this document helps to focus. So as a community, and that's what we encourage community members to get together to decide, as a group, and put forward a collective, feedback as to how they wish for their community to go. This document helps to focus that, to say, okay, here are the things that on a broad national scale we need to consider. They'll be implemented on an individual basis based on your community, but things such as open space, we have to have that discussion. Where we're going to live, how we're going to live, where we're going to work. These are things we must consider, and we must put forward a response.
Exactly.
Okay. This is a follow-up request, a follow-up on the terminology defined, to define an overlay and the area plan, and how were they defined?
Okay.
So the overlay, that's where there's unique additional considerations beyond the underlying zoning. And so though, I think I explained it a little bit at the meeting on Monday, that there's kind of a nuance there, because take, for example, the natural resource preservation overlay, that natural resources, those natural assets, have different qualities and criteria that we would want to address through different rules and regulations about how they're treated, how they're kind of incorporated into projects, or in certain situations they might be recommended for protection from development. So those overlays are where we have additional considerations beyond the kind of baseline zoning category.
I think it's key to underscore that you have a zone which sets those sort of development criteria, but as Richard said, that overlay does not replace that underlying zone. It enhances it and augments it. So, you know, if you've got an area that's zoned low density residential, that overlay, so you've got certain development potential that's attached to low density residential, but looking at a site, there may be a portion of the site that's best left in its natural state. So the attachment of that overlay would allow the Central Planning Authority, the Development Control Board, additional tools to actually be able to preserve that environmental feature while still allowing some level of development on the parcel.
So true. So true.
Okay.
And Donna would like to add one thing. I know when this plan was being implemented, there were individuals that thought, well, this is a document that government was putting out to be rammed down in somebody's throat. I want to stress, this is not the case. This is something to make the future of the Cayman Islands far better than what it is today. It is quite obvious that the lack of a vision on what has happened in our especially in the Georgetown, West Bay area, could have been avoided if we had a plan of such, what we're talking about now. If we had a plan then, things would have worked out a lot better for the entire population.
Yeah. Another concern that I think was voiced at the a couple of the meetings as well was, you know, we hope that the plan doesn't go on a shelf somewhere. Like it's you know, and you're reassuring the public that that's just not going to happen.
No.
I have a question that surrounds persons who are coming to these meetings, persons who are providing their feedback, residents who are doing that on all 3 islands. Should they consider things like when they provide their feedback? Should they consider something like the effects of climate change that we've seen on the islands in the last couple of years when it comes to the requests that they want for their particular community? Is that something that they should be considering as well?
Well, Donna, I think climate change is something that all of us, regardless of where you live on the 3 islands, climate change is something that we all got to be aware of. We just saw Beryl just cross by. We were quite lucky, but I give you a prime example. There is beach erosion. We get people that buy property on the beach, and of course everyone wants to be right next door to the water that they can walk out in the morning. But we need to take climate change seriously into consideration. We need to build further back from the ocean. We need to build stronger buildings. You know, I had someone made a comment that I think when I build my house, I'm going to put a cement roof on top of it. You know, stuff like that we have to consider, because the strength of these hurricanes that come our way. I mean, an example, Beryl went through on this south coast of Jamaica at a Category 5. If that had came by our neighborhood, we would have had some serious problems. So we need to take climate change very, very seriously.
Yeah, there was a lady on Little Cayman earlier this week too that mentioned, you know, about building houses on stilts, you know, something that where the water can, you know, go under, and so I thought that was very interesting, and you know, so that's the reason why I asked the question: should persons, when they're considering their feedback, should they really think about, you know, how to best build because of the conditions that we live on the beautiful beaches, we enjoy it, but you know, there's ways to build around it, and
just to that point, Donna, again back to this issue, earlier statement about increasing the tools available to decision-making bodies. So currently, your setbacks are tied to zones, and these are very broad.
Right.
And they don't take into account the dynamic nature of things such as the beach. There's some areas that benefit from a protective reef. Some
Right.
areas do not. So now through this process, we're able to craft specific legislation through regulations that would respect that and acknowledge that we can't use blanket setbacks throughout the islands, because we're dealing with a natural resource that is very dynamic, and we need to respond equally dynamic to that to those needs.
Okay, so we have some questions from Slido. One is, does the plan take into account, or will it take into account, development moratoriums in certain zones and areas? You want me to
At this
repeat it,
point,
or-
I wouldn't say that development moratoriums per se, but again, it's looking at how that pattern of development will be rolled out. And again, looking at things such as density, being more in tune and more respectful to the physical form and the nature of land, and not sort of getting stuck at that broad brush approach that says, well, it's residentially zoned land, here are the rules. We can actually take a more deeper dive and say, be more sensitive, be more respectful, rather, to the specific conditions that apply. I mean, we travel throughout the island, the land that we find in East End and North Side, it's quite different than what you're going to find, on the western end of the island. And I think we need to have those tools to be able to respond to that equally.
Okay. The next question is, the 1997 development plan hasn't worked. What is different about the plan, and why will this work?
Well, I wouldn't say that the 97 plan hasn't worked. I mean, again, we all start with something and we evolve from there. I think where we've fallen down is that evolution process hasn't happened as is envisioned in legislation. And again, I think the 97 plan, which came from the 77 plan, it was fit for purpose at the time in which it was created. And I think the framers of that legislation were well aware of that. And that's why they created the legislation the way to say that the plan needs to be, revisited a minimum of every 5 years.
Okay.
So, I wouldn't say that it hasn't worked. As again, it's planning, because it involves life, right? It gets to how we live, how we choose to live, how we work, where we work, how we live, the type of housing that's available, how our children play, how we entertain ourselves. It's fully inclusive, and that's why you have to approach it that way. You can't say, well, I'm just going to tackle one little thing and hope that it all works out. It's just all entwined. So I said, as a country, we have evolved. Our development pattern has evolved. As people, we have evolved, and we now need a new development plan that respects that evolution and responds to it.
Okay. The next question is, it says, the overlays have not been effective in the past, for example, protecting historic homes. How are these overlays going to be different to what we have now?
I think in reference to historic homes, the intention is that we can work more closely with the National Trust, with their heritage register, and really, I suppose, be more considered about a particular property, whether it's a property that needs outright protection, or whether it just has certain features that could be incorporated into future design if that property was to be rebuilt or renovated in some way. So I think it's just being more considered in general terms about what those overlays are, but then focusing in on the areas and what makes that particular historic overlay unique. Again, in a similar way, the natural resource preservation overlay, that is a new overlay, and we've recognised in the planning statement that not all natural resources are equal. They have different kind of criteria and strengths and asset values that through regulations we can respond to. So that should give them more teeth and be more effective.
Donna, to be honest with you, I think it's rather disappointing from my point of view that some of our older homes, or older Caymanian homes, was not preserved. Because if you look around, those older Caymanian homes that was built out of mahogany and grape tree limbs and wattle and stuff, those homes are still standing compared to some of these structures that just went during Hurricane Ivan. If you drive down to Key West, you see all of these old homes that is so uniquely preserved. And I think that we should have done the same thing here, but we still have an opportunity to save some of those older homes in all districts.
Okay. So the next question is, the planning statement, as we've mentioned, is the first step. What is the time frame on that, and how long would this take for it to be implemented, the planning statement stage?
So the time scales are that the consultation period is now open until the 6th of August. So you have until then to submit your comments. We, within the department, would then go through all of the comments received and provide responses to them that we would share with the Central Planning Authority for consideration. They would then be forwarded to a development plan tribunal, and as I said in the presentation at the start, the planning statement ultimately would need to be approved in Parliament, so that has a process and a time scale, but our intention is that would happen within this calendar year. And once we're through that process, we're then in a position to start work on the area plans.
Okay. The next question is, Grand Cayman has established zoning. Does the Sister Islands have similar zoning?
You want to have them? Okay. At present, the Sister Islands do not have zoning. And again, that's one of the challenges in terms of the implementation of the regulations, because the regulations are very much predicated and are geared towards the implementation of a zoning plan. I know, for many years, it's sort of been something that was not readily acceptable. But I think more and more persons are getting, to the understanding that the zoning is what sets those rules. And now then, and again, through these area plans, you no longer have to worry about sort of the broad brush approach that if you, allow low density residential to apply or hotel tourism, this is the development pattern that will be, I know it's a strong word, but that will be forced upon you. You as a community can actually now, take and craft the implementation aspects so that making sure that that zoning plan is actually indicative and representative of what your community wants.
Exactly.
Back to the statement about building heights. We can get this far down into, at the Little Cayman meeting, it was noted the fact of, getting into architectural review. That might be something that's appropriate in a setting such as Little Cayman that has a very distinct character that you want to preserve and grow, whereas that might not be something that's more applicable to Grand Cayman. And what Richard said about historic overlays, there's particular areas where you want to preserve the character of the area, and certain areas because of how you want to preserve a particular structure. And again, it's giving decision makers those tools that they can actually implement and represent the wishes of the community.
So true.
Okay. The next question, will the sensitive coastline overlay zone prevent the construction of coastal structures?
I would not say it would prevent outright. Again, there are going to be areas where we have to accept that the uniqueness of that area does not lend itself to that. But again, it increases the toolbox, tools in the toolbox in terms of setbacks. So there's some areas, coastal-wise, where it's still applicable for development, but we need an additional setback. We need to, we're able to take better into account things such as the beach ridge. And how do we preserve the beach ridge? How do we allow for the dynamic nature of the coastline to actually be put forward?
Okay. Other questions. Why are environmental impact assessments not mentioned in the statement? The planning framework mentions the need for impact assessments. Why isn't it mentioned in the statement?
So the environmental review processes are referenced in the National Planning Framework, and I think because those come out of the National Conservation Act, it's kind of not an area that we're governed by the Development Planning Act. It's not an area that is kind of within our remit, I think it's fair to say. That's not to say that we don't acknowledge environmental impact assessments. It's just that they kind of come about through a different mechanism, a different means.
Yep.
Okay. How will the plan ensure the availability of affordable housing for all income levels? Mr. Pandoy, I think you talked about this a bit.
Yeah, so again, it's having a plan that allows us, based on the area, to respond to the needs of that area. So in certain areas where we have the necessary infrastructure in place, we can respond by having higher densities. Using that higher density to reduce the overall cost of construction, reducing the footprints of buildings. But again, that needs to come with it, needs the infrastructure to support that. For instance, as a community, as we get denser, things such as centralized wastewater treatment become more important than when we have larger lots, and which supports things such as septic tanks.
Right.
So again, now if we can look at areas where we have the necessary infrastructure, where we can put in place the necessary infrastructure in a cohesive manner, we can actually drive down the cost of construction by allowing higher densities, potentially higher buildings that reduce, again, the footprints, that can house more people in a smaller area, minimizing the impact overall on the landmass of the country.
Okay, what's a good example of that we may have today?
Okay, so when the regulations first started out back in the 70s, the minimum sort of lot size for a house, say in the low density zone, was 12.5. We've created mechanisms by which we can create affordable housing units that allow those lot sizes to be reduced down to 6,500. Again, increasing the density, more people in a smaller footprint.
You're building up.
We're able to build up. You can do apartment buildings right now up to 3 stories, but then the question is, in zones, say, closer to town, where we have the infrastructure, where we want to bring the ability for people to live closer to where they're working, so we're not having this reverse commute, and so this commute every day. It would make sense for us to be in a position that we can house more people closer to where they're working, where they have access to that infrastructure, where they're able to support, your commercial core a little bit better. I mean, simple things like, like Georgetown, for instance, we have this exodus at 5 o'clock. But if people are living here and they're able to get a wide range of housing types, then they're able to support these businesses after hours. I mean, one of the things we see in a pattern is because our housing types are so dispersed. So it's okay if I want to live in multifamily, I can do that in a certain particular area. But as my lifestyle changes, and that's one of the things we want to be in a plan, to give the options that people can live in a particular area through a particular life cycle. They can say, I can live closer to the core of Georgetown sort of early on in my career. I want a smaller area. Cost and accessibility are important to me. But as my lifestyle changes and I think about having a family, now all of a sudden space becomes more of a consideration. But I don't necessarily want to leave this particular area, but I want to be able to evolve my personal circumstances within the area in which I am. But right now we sort of have a pattern that sort of forces you to leave this area to go to somewhere else in order to address that need.
Okay, very interesting there. So what mechanisms will be used, this question is asking, to monitor and evaluate the implementation or putting in place of this plan? So how are we going to manage that and monitor that as the plan goes on to make sure that everything is,
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that we're, I think, still considering internally. Obviously, we haven't prepared an area plan yet, but I think a key part of an area plan preparation would be identifying key performance indicators, which would give us those indications of whether the plan is performing, whether it's kind of achieving the vision that we've established for each area plan. And that might be considering vacancy within a particular zoning category within an area, and we can review that after the 5-year period or whatever it might be, and kind of review whether that zoning is still needed in that area. Similarly, going back to affordable housing, are we producing the right number of those smaller units in the location, and if not, we need to revisit the density requirements in a given area. So that's a really good point. It's something that within our team we're giving more thought to, but would be a key part of this process as it becomes a continuous review cycle.
And just to tag on to that, again, we're at the area plan level, we're able to be more responsive because you're not dealing with it at a national level. So, sort of trends that over the years, we've noticed that, obviously the statistics bear out that, Bodentown, one of the fastest growing districts on the island, but the zoning map has been relatively the same. So it has, because of that process by which to change that is quite intensive to move that forward, because you're dealing with it. Although you want to address an issue in Bodentown, you're addressing, you're having to address on a national level. So again, the ability to be very responsive It takes such a long time to do that. But again, with an area plan, as we're noticing trends, we can be more responsive to those trends and say, look, okay, if we've got more people moving to Bodentown, how would we be going to in terms of the availability and provision of infrastructure? Okay, if we're going to increase densities to meet the needs of all these people who now want to live in Bodentown, okay, let's do it so that they're closer to infrastructure, that we're not having people move into an area that we now have to build a road to accommodate them. We can create that density, we can drive down costs, because those are the things that factor into construction. If you're building houses, but there's a huge component of infrastructure. But if I have to, in building houses, I now have to factor in the huge cost of putting in this infrastructure. This is where the numbers start to get out of sequence. But if we can better responsive, on that area plan level, we think we can drive better outcomes.
Okay.
And Donna, I would like to add on to what the director just said on this area plan, because I think right now we find where there's a lot of good agricultural land that is being used for housing, or commercial properties and stuff is being used for housing. With these area plans, we can set aside, well, this particular area is designed for commercial purposes. Areas in the East End is designed for agriculture, that we don't have commercial in one area or commercial where it shouldn't be, that everything will be defined to its specific area.
And of course, they could be multi-purpose properties as well.
Exactly.
They could be residential,
Exactly.
commercial.
Yeah,
People may
exactly.
want to live upstairs and have businesses downstairs. So that's something that's...
Exactly, and it gives that ability to respond to the call for mixed-use development.
Mixed,
Yeah.
yes.
As you said, residential above, commercial below. Again, minimizing the footprint, minimizing the utilization of land, and and these are the things that for us drive better outcomes. They drive better communities, because again, you now have a community that has a greater diversity of people who can live in that community. Because again, I can live in that community saying, you know what, a studio apartment works for me.
Yeah.
I don't have to leave my community, a community that I've grown up in, all my life, in order to meet my needs now for housing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can all agree that those of us who live in the East are certainly enjoying less traffic because school is out.
So true.
And
Yeah.
schools
So
that
true.
were built eons ago, most of them were built in the Georgetown area. So this question asks, how does this plan zone for schools? Does it allow for more schools outside of Georgetown to alleviate the challenges of so many schools so close together?
So yes, at the area plan level, because we're looking at communities. See, those are provisions that are currently in the regulations. But again, and one of the challenges with the current plan is that, it's sort of looking at, the 60,000 foot view. And when the plan was created, it said, okay, well, the plan's going to look at, that 60,000 foot level, as it were. But these individual boards now need to look at the sort of, the site-specific level. But that's when things such as schools fall through the cracks. Because if I'm focusing on a particular site, the plan's looking a little bit, more higher level. Who's sort of looking at that mid-range? But now through an area plan, if we're looking at, we say, okay, here's the housing that we're accommodating. Okay. X number of people, we can look at ratios, that's going to translate into X number of kids. Where do we need to put high schools, and what are the age groups? Where do we need to put primary schools, high schools? Where can we share infrastructure now, but being responsive to know that, we can share that infrastructure on a high school level between two areas based on a growth rate for the next 8 years.
Right.
But we have to provide that once we hit that target based on that growth, we need to have another high school. And where do we need to have that school? And we can better respond, and we can help other agencies better implement their strategies that they're not in conflict with the land use pattern.
Okay.
And Donna would just add to that. A prime example to what the director just said is the school in the Clifton Hunter School in Frank Sound that facilitates North Side, East End, and Bodentown. So you got 3 communities that is utilizing that one school. And these are, it all fits together as a package.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So another question. This one's from Facebook. Do we have a say in how the zones will be set?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so that would be a key part of the area plan preparation, and I think those would be actually fantastic events. When we get to that point, the consultation exercises would very much have maps, and we would invite comment on what the zoning would be and what the appropriate kind of mix and the balance would be. And as I said, each area plan is effectively a development plan. It would be subject to that full round of consultation, open to anybody within 3 islands, depending on, it doesn't matter which area plan it is that we're dealing with. And yeah, we would certainly be inviting input on what the zones and the overlays would be for each area.
And Donna, just on what Richard said, that when I said earlier, this is why it takes all of us to get involved, you know, and I can't stress that enough. It takes all of us, because when we all get involved, we don't have anything to complain about. So we need to get involved so that we can specifically say, this is what we want, and we were all involved with it. That we can't point fingers at anyone and say, well, yeah, they did this and they did that. We need total involvement of the entire population.
Okay. The next question is, are there population projections, I think we've touched on this a few times already, for each district to ensure that we are building the right infrastructure to support future growth?
No, so we don't have population targets, we don't have those figures. That's kind of not how Cayman has grown. Cayman is not a fixed, planned society in that way. So the approach that we take through all of this process is a performance-based planning approach. So as communities grow, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there alongside that growth to maintain the quality of life standards. And that's why we need to work more closely with different agencies within and outside of government to ensure that infrastructure does align with growth.
Yep.
And that we're positioning growth where the infrastructure exists,
yes,
and where the infrastructure can grow to accommodate that growth.
Okay. The next question is, the word plan is used quite extensively. Everything is a separate plan. Is the plan cohesive? And how is the plan going to be implemented, which I think we already...
Yeah, I believe it will be cohesive. I think that diagram that I showed how we're going from the National Planning Framework that we prepared over a good portion of time, but that pulled in information from years of studies within Department of Planning and across government. All of those different studies and plans fed into the National Planning Framework. The policies that were established in the National Planning Framework have made their way into the planning statement that we're consulting on now. And then each area plan feeds out of that planning statement. So it's a very, I think, cohesive process.
It is.
You know, national objectives are then applied on an area by area basis.
Okay. The next part of this question is, it says, once the planning statement is completed, can you specify the steps in the process without the legal or political jargon? I mean, I call it technical, I would call it, describe it as technical jargon that most people, the average person wouldn't understand, but they're calling it legal or political jargon. So any response to that? You want me to repeat the question?
Sorry, yeah, repeat this, please.
Okay, yes. So once the planning statement is completed, can you specify the steps in the process without the legal or political jargon?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so once the planning statement consultation is complete, we will review all the comments that have been received. We'll provide feedback to those comments, and we'll publish those comments as well. We certainly want to be transparent in this process, and we were with the National Planning Framework back in 2018. Once those comments have been reviewed, it would go to what's called a Development Plan Tribunal, which is an independent board that would review comments where there's, I suppose, disagreement. It would find a common kind of route through to kind of get us to arrive at a final planning statement document. That then ultimately goes to Parliament for approval, and once we have that approved planning statement, we can then commence work on area plans. So I hope that's kind of, in simple terms,
that answers the question
yeah.
for the person, yeah. So the last plan was in 1997. That was from 1977. What is the schedule on which this new development plan will be updated? In other words, how often would it be updated?
I think, Donna, there's a stipulation in the regulations that the plan should be reviewed every 5 years. and I think that it's extremely important that we stress, because our country is growing. Every day we see different changes. So in order for this this vision to work, it has to be updated on a regular basis. I'm not sure what the time frame would be on that, but I would imagine that if we set 5 years, that whoever is running the show at that particular time, it's important that the powers to be make sure that that review is done so that we can keep abreast of what's happening.
Okay. Richard, you mentioned the National Planning Framework, and this person wants to know what happened to that National Planning Framework that was published in 2018.
Yes, so that National Planning Framework, we carried out the consultation in late 2018 and into early 2019. Some updates were made to the document based on that consultation. The document is still available for review on PlanCayman.ky, and that document is not one that guides decision-making by the Central Planning Authority, but the policies contained with it have fed into the planning statement that we're consulting on now. So it's kind of it's an overarching guiding policy document. It doesn't carry the weight of being something that decisions are based on purely from that document, but as I said, the policies within it are contained now within this planning statement.
Okay. I'd just like to take a moment to remind everybody out there that you can send in your questions via YouTube, as well as the Facebook Lives that are going on at this time. Also, you can send questions anonymously if you'd like to via slido.com. The code for that is 239-8832. That's 239-8832. As everyone on the panel has been saying, we want it's crucial to get your feedback and say in on this national level consultation process as it relates to the development plan. So after August 6th, this person wants to know what happens next.
So after August 6th, we review all of the comments, and this is, again, reiterating that point that we need those written comments. It's fantastic when we go to each of these events and we have the discussions and we receive comments, but we really need them in writing so that we can kind of incorporate them into our process. But as we review those comments, we would then provide them to the Central Planning Authority for consideration. Then those kind of areas that perhaps agreement is not reached, those comments would go to a tribunal for guidance, and then the document would make its way through the processes of approval, which ultimately goes to Parliament for approval.
Okay. What if I'm somebody out there and I, don't quite understand what's going on, but, I'm somewhat interested because it's piqued my interest, the conversations and the meetings happening and so on and so forth. But I have some questions that I need to get answered. Where can persons send those questions to? Who can they contact to, just kind of go over their questions that they may have? Sure.
Our team within the Department of Planning, the policy team, we have a bespoke email address for this project. It's plancayman.gov.ky. So absolutely, questions, comments can be sent there. And in fact, we are kind of steering and would prefer feedback through the feedback form, but if persons want to submit their feedback by email, that's absolutely fine. And then just going back to your first point about how can people kind of stay in touch, then we have a mailing list. If you subscribe to that with your email address, then you'll receive updates as the project moves through its processes and as we kind of work towards area plans and future events. So encourage people to sign up to that, absolutely.
Okay, so when persons come to the meeting as well, they sign up. Is that one of the reasons they have to sign up, so that they can, you're just not going to be stalking them, you just want to provide them with the vital information, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you. So another question is, how long does the tribunal take, and will it hold up the entire plan or just for the specific area?
I mean, I don't have a specific timescale, I guess, on how long a tribunal takes. I think it's subject to the number of comments received.
And their availability,
But I certainly wouldn't see it holding up. In fact, it's kind of a key part of the process to help us arrive at a document that's been considered. And as I said, those those areas that perhaps we don't have one clear direct steer on, we have that independent board to kind of give us a steer and to craft the document to help it reach its kind of final state.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, one of the key things of breaking this down into a multi-staged approach is it allows whichever party is at that particular to focus on that particular issue. So in the past, because it was just one huge exercise, I think that's what led to the amount of time, and that's probably what the person providing the comment or question is sort of maybe alluding to, is because it was such a heavy lift, because you're dealing with policy considerations, you're dealing with on-the-ground zoning changes. So you had a board that was dealing with, okay, is this the right policy stair? Also trying to consider, should this particular piece of land be zoned X? Right. So by taking a multi-stage focused approach, it allows us to get it right, we say at each stage, but also to drive it in a very effective manner. Exactly. As we're not just sort of all discombobulated trying to make it all, it's a very structured process.
Throughout the meetings, we've noticed, as Mr. Handel pointed out, that we want everyone in the Cayman Islands to be involved and to provide feedback, come to the meetings, so on and so forth. How has the turnout been, or what would you say to encourage people like developers and contractors and the people who are actually building on these areas? How important is it for them to show up to these meetings?
I think it's extremely important. The developers and stuff are part of the force that is driving this new development plan. I think it's very important for them to get involved. It would make life easier, I think, for all of us if they got involved.
Okay. There's another question that's in. It says, to ensure sustainable development in all areas, who is involved? To ensure sustainable development in all areas, who is involved? How is that process managed? That's the second part of the question.
Involved in terms of, the consultation process, the various agencies. So, I mean, and Richard alluded to, we did an extensive document and sort of gathering of various policies, strategies, consultations with various government entities. There's a tremendous amount of information that's out there. And we didn't just start to say, well, we're going to do a new development plan, so we're going to reinvent the wheel. We took into account a lot of these established, published government strategies from the various entities. We brought all of that information to bear, and in order to use those as the things that drove the strategy. So we weren't out there, and I think sometimes it's a little bit of a misnomer. People thought, well, we just sat within the Department of Planning and we came up with a plan and we said, well, this is our plan. No, this plan belongs to everyone, and everyone has to be a part of developing this plan, because this will affect you on an individual basis and a collective basis. Individually, as I said, back to how I get to live and on my house through housing, versus do we all sit in traffic every morning, looking at each other. So that's why we took that very broad collaborative approach and brought everything to bear. And as just to top on what Mr. Handel said in terms of the question about developers, contractors, again, they're part of that process. They're the group that, they're the ones driving and creating that development. So they need to be part of that conversation, so we can have an upfront conversation that says, okay, we may have this aspiration, but economically or operationally, here are some of the challenges with that. And we can have that discussion. We can have, we can find that common ground, and we can, and we can choose a path forward. Because I think right now there's a sort of a lot of angst in the process. So, well, who's involved? Where's involved? But again, it's because we leave a lot of things to an very site-specific debate or consideration, when these things really need to be considered at a larger area level, so that they're, back to Richard's point, so it's fully integrated. And it's not sort of broken down into the silo approach of saying, well, what happens on this site, although it impacts another site, we're going to deal with that later. No, we need to deal with that up front to make sure it's effective and efficient, and we're not unnecessarily spending resources to correct things. We can get it right up front.
Okay. If we break down, let's say, every district, let's use Grand Cayman as an example. We break down each district, and let's say we're in, East End, and the East End community says, they come back with all this feedback of things that they want to see in their community going forward as far as development and planning for land use is concerned. But you're the experts, right? And you may not necessarily see it working. That type of feedback and those kinds of requests or considerations to be the best for that district. What happens then?
Well, I mean, obviously we provide technical advice. Planning is something that it's, you can provide as much technical information as possible, but again, because you're dealing with, the lives of individuals. So that takes, that has to take a very important part in that conversation. Now, from a technical level, it is our responsibility to evaluate those various options and to give that necessary feedback so that an informed decision can be made.
Exactly.
If somebody says, you know what, I hear you, but we're willing to, have this outcome because we think this is important. Our role is to make sure that you have that information up front and that you can make a fully informed decision. And this is why I think ultimately, development plans are not simply, shouldn't say simply, but are not just left to, say, an entity like the Central Planning Authority. They put forward the plan, but these are documents that must be debated in Parliament, because there's a clear understanding that it has a far-reaching implication on the lives of individuals, and we must take that into account.
Okay. Yep. All right, another question is, in older communities, will this plan stop developers from coming in and building multi-unit buildings next to single-family homes?
Yeah. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Donna, to be honest with you, being the deputy chair of the CPA, it is something that is very concerning to me. We see objections, and I think it is something that we have to pay extremely care attention to, because if you're living in say for instance, in a low-lying area, and you come in, you put in a multi-complex of a couple of hundred apartments. If you're in a single-family home and it's developed in say 2 months, you wake up in the morning, your little community then has another 300 people that you go, well, wow, who are those individuals? And it has a far-reaching effect, I think, on that little community. So we have to pay really close attention to trying to how we can integrate those complexes into a local residential area.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, and again, the details through those area plans help to give more guidance to decision makers.
Yep.
Because right now, you've got some broad brush approach that says the apartments where in a residential zone where suitable. We need to get to a level as a country where we define what suitable is, and we need to, back to that earlier point, we need to have targets. We need to be able to say, okay, these are the things that make a site capable of supporting multifamily. And so from the get-go, we know, okay, here's the criteria. It's not on a very individual basis, and that's where one of the challenges, and it's an extremely difficult job that the decision makers are faced with is, on a site-specific level, and that's where we need an area plan that, or a development plan on an area plan level that gives them that guidance, that steer at the appropriate level, so that they can actually represent and implement the wishes of the community.
Okay.
And I would just add to that, Donna, I think at the same time, we need to have developers who are a little more conscious of the area that they want to develop in, that they can take into consideration those single-family homes and stuff. Because sometimes it's kind of heart-rendering, when you have 4 little or 6 houses here, and then you got a 200-room complex here. It's not an easy task, I put it that way. So we need, from my humble opinion, the developers of the day need to take consideration to where they're going to develop, how they're going to develop it, and at the same time that the integration of this low-lying area of family homes can coexist with what they're building at the same time.
Yeah. Or you'll even hear, residents make comments like, I'm not so sure how that works, but they'll say, oh, if you have a park or you have, apartments next to you, it could, up the value or devalue your property. I mean, I hear those kinds of comments from just the average person. Like I said, I don't know how true that is, but people get on edge because of
They
it.
do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah. All right, so some more questions. Some areas were historically single-family residential and low-density residential and have had increasing levels of density, for example, South Sound. I guess that's just a statement, but they want you to comment on it. Okay. There's a second part of the question. This is significantly changing the personality of the area. Will there be any consideration given to maintain a better balance within these areas? I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
Some areas were historically single-family residential and low-density residential and have had increasing levels of density, for example, South Sound. This is significantly changing the personality of the area. Will there be any consideration given to maintain a better balance within these areas?
Absolutely, and again, that's why it's crafting the regulations that support and implement a particular area plan, that implement that feel and look of a community, whilst taking into account many national issues such as, and this is why the planning statement is so important, because it highlights the things that a community has to turn its mind to. A community can't say, well, you know what, affordable housing doesn't apply to us, so we don't have to think about it. No, that's something that has to be dealt with on a national level. It's something that's important on a national level. So at a community level, you as a community, you get to be able to possibly drive, you drive how you respond to that. Just like how you have different housing types in a particular area, we can be more sensitive, but we have to consider things of multiple housing types. But how does a community wish to respond to that, and not be able to say, well, we're not going to tackle that subject. And that's why it's important that we have that overriding document, which is the planning statement, and why it's important that that document be agreed. Because then that's what's going to drive those discussions and allow us then to craft a community outcome. Because again, we see these communities because again they're the result of very broad zoning regulations that again were put in place when we had the land availability and we were very much spaced out, so we could afford to do something over there because seeing it took, but now that we're living in such tight-knit communities and stuff, things that as a country we would say, we'll never have to consider that. These are the things now that we do need to consider, how we interact with each other and making sure that we have the proper structure in place to minimize or eliminate conflicts.
Okay. All right, another question. How will the plan ensure social equity and inclusion across different communities and demographics?
Well, I think I just briefly touched on that, and again, it's a great question. Yeah. As it relates to, the provision of affordable housing, and to make sure that we have housing stock in communities that represent a broad, broad social and income levels, that persons are able to actually live in a community that they're associated with, and they can live in a community that they want to live in, and that they have options. Now those options are going to be different and tailored to a particular community, based on the land use pattern that exists, certain environmental considerations, etc. But we're providing those options, and we're not disenfranchising or excluding anyone from that conversation and how that community tackles that particular issue.
Okay. Another question asked, could objections be expanded beyond neighboring properties for developments that would impact a community? Question again, could objections be expanded beyond neighboring properties for developments that would impact a community? I think there's a 2-mile radius already, right?
Well, so when you do a newspaper ad, it hits 1,000 feet. But again, that's more of a regulation consideration, which is a little bit outside of the scope of the planning statement. Okay. But something that has been raised, and we have made note of it for when we get to that stage of discussions.
Okay. Well, that'll be interesting to hear what kind of feedback you got and what kind of numbers people are really throwing out there to each of you or to the CPA as well as you all. So Mr. Handel's remarks about the necessity of responsible developers. Does the plan take into account any parameters to reinforce development? Does the plan take into account any parameters to reinforce development? Because you made the remark about the necessity of having responsible developers.
I think it does, and just coming back to that comment that I made, I think we need to have responsible development. At the same time, we need to have responsible developers. In some instances, and I know I'm going to catch a lot of flack for this, I don't really care. We have developers here that are here, as we all say, for the buck, and they don't care. They come in here and they develop something, they sell it off, and then they move to another project without any indication of how it's going to affect the day-to-day living ability of local residents. Mm-hmm. And I think it's extremely important for us to have developers, when they're coming up with a scheme or a plan, that they take the community at heart, that is going to be beneficial to both parties.
And just tagging on, expand upon what Mr. Handel says, by having these area plans, a developer is able to, at that level, to appreciate, what it is that a community, how a community wishes for their community to develop out, mm-hmm. and they're able better at that stage to factor that into their development plans. And again, we've got better correlation between things such as density and the provision of infrastructure.
Exactly.
Because right now, we see the development pattern where persons are being, developers are going further out because of the cost of land. A huge component of that is the provision of infrastructure. So if we can have better integration, they can say, well, okay, I can purchase land that's closer to where people are working, reducing commute times, because I have access to infrastructure. And that's not a cost that has to be borne upfront into the development, mm-hmm. In trying to price and create this thing. So again, it creates better pricing for the consumer, mm-hmm. but it also helps focus a developer in particular areas, and it helps them to actually produce their product.
Okay. To our viewers out there, we're moving in now to our last 30 minutes of the virtual town hall. We'd like you to get those questions in via Facebook and YouTube, as well as on Slido. Again, Slido, it's slido.com. You can send your questions in there anonymously. The code for Slido is 2398832. So get your questions in. We do have another question for the panelists. It asks, given Beryl and the recent storms, how are developers being held responsible for proper storm management?
Okay. So again, dealing with things such as stormwater management, that's an area that unfortunately, that the current plan doesn't address to the level where we need. It's dealt with on a site-specific basis, but as I think we can all appreciate, that's something that has to be dealt with more on a regional and an area basis. So again, through these more focused plans, we can start to address things such as, where are we going to retain stormwater? If we're going to increase densities, which compacts the amount of impervious surface, we can better drive those calculations and say, okay, how much rainfall do we now need to either store, dissipate, or deal with, and that we are able to then bring newer, more innovative processes to deal with that, mm-hmm. and move away from sort of this, and again, they serve the purpose at their time, but the sort of drilling of the deep well, we need to get beyond that. And the provision of an area plan, the more focused discussion allows us to say, maybe in this situation, simply digging deep wells is not the response to that. We need to have more regional stormwater retention, and we need to then be able to ensure that as persons are developing in the community, that what happens on a particular site doesn't remove or somehow diminish that that plan that deals with stormwater for a community. Because again, we've moved beyond the days when, I focus on my stormwater, you focus on yours, and it all works out. No, you and I need to collaboratively in a community appreciate, understand, and support each other in dealing with stormwater. Because if my yard floods, it's just a matter of time before yours.
Exactly.
You know, and we can't just keep kicking the can down the road. We need to say upfront, this is how we're going to deal with this, and we need to respond appropriately to it.
And taking a little bit further to what the director said, specifically in low-lying areas, it is very concerning, because if I'm down here and you're building up here and you don't have the appropriate mechanism in place to catch your water, needless to say, you're going to wake up in the morning when you go put your foot on the ground, you might be in 2 feet of water without even knowing it. So it is like the director said, everything has to work tandemly.
Okay. Another question. So what updates or changes to the legal and regulatory framework are anticipated to support the new development plan?
Yeah, it's a key part of forming the development plan, in that an area plan will set out the policies. It will define how the zones are applied to the map, what the zoning requirements are, but the legislative version of that would be the development and planning regulations, and that would be updated on a area by area basis. And as we covered before, each area would have different requirements. So building height, setbacks, all of these different kind of density considerations will be different area by area and zone by zone. So they would be reflected within the regulations.
Okay. I'm not so sure you can answer this question, but let's try anyway. Will developers of businesses requiring large number of expatriate workers, for example, hotels, be required to contribute to affordable housing?
Donna, I don't want to get in trouble over this, but I've always advocated that we have limited housing here in Cayman, and being a part of the CPA, I see applications come in where individuals want to take their houses, their home, and make it into a 2-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom apartment. The director alluded to this earlier, where you have high density and someone wants to build an extra room onto their house for extra income. It's imperative, the more hotels, we need more accommodations. If you're going to go and build a 300-room or 500-room hotel, I think that the onus should be on the developer, that he should participate in some kind of development so that you can house the employees that are going to be working at that hotel.
And just tagging on to what Mr. Handel says, it's not a one-fits-all solution.
Exactly.
So in some areas, and depending on the type of development, constructing, say, a 200-unit apartment, a multifamily complex, might be an appropriate response. But in another area, ancillary units, setting regulations that allow somebody to, convert their garage into a studio apartment that provides housing for persons who are working, in a particular area, particular provision of a service.
Industry.
So, and again, this is why, we need to have these various tools available, and it can't just sort of be, well, the only response to that is, unless they're prepared to build, a 300-unit apartment building for everyone of that particular development to be housed in, which may sound upfront to, well, you causal here, it's going to result in this. But then when you start taking into account, how does that change the fabric of a community? The stormwater implications, the traffic management and infrastructure implications. It's not just simply, well, I'll put 300 units, but again, what is that impact? And in some areas that might be an appropriate response, but in others that appropriate response may be these ancillary units. And we want to be set the rules, because again, we want to make sure that a neighbor's ability to create that ancillary unit does not then detract from their neighbor's ability for their to enjoy their property. So that's why it's important to, have that established up front, so everyone has a set, expectation that the rules are in place to protect both parties. But again, they're able to respond to a need on a national level, to an individual solution, as it were, but not detracting from their ability of their neighbor to to enjoy their property as well.
Okay.
And
An
Donna,
example of that would be someplace like, let's say, Health City, that actually built
Exactly.
and they're still not able to house everyone.
Everyone.
But that's a good example.
Yeah.
Of something.
and we have to bear in mind, a couple of things that drive the economy: the financial industry, construction, and tourism. And I think this plan kind of it's geared toward that. You can harmoniously put all of those bits and pieces together, that it can work. One of the things that has always perturbed me is the land cost that has developed here in the last 5 years, specifically for younger Caymanians. It is extremely difficult for a young Caymanian. Say, for instance, if you graduate from college and you're 24, 25 years old, and you have the ambition that you want to own your own house. To buy a $10,000 square foot lot, in some places it's going to cost $150,000 to $200,000. Now, hypothetically, you're going to have to go to the bank and get a mortgage. It's going to take you 10, 12 years to pay that mortgage off if you're making between $60,000 and $80,000 a year. By the time you get through paying for that lot, you got to go get another mortgage to build a house. So my point is, by the time that 24-year-old is able to build a house and stand up in his backyard and go, oh, I feel good because I'm in my own house, he's going to be 40, 50 years old with still a mortgage. And we have to come up with some mechanism that we can lower the cost for our younger Caymanians, because it is frightening. I talk to a lot of these young guys and young ladies and stuff, and it's otherwise we're going to end up with instances where one generation be staying with their family until that generation can move out, and then you got another generation staying there, and we have to do whatever we can to avoid situation as such.
And just to add to that, our ministry is actively working on finding solutions to affordable housing. And there's a study that persons might recall, the consultation that took place a couple of months ago, and I think we're expecting the outcomes of that very soon. And so if there's recommendations that we can incorporate into this plan, that we absolutely would. We've worked very closely with the consultants preparing that. So.
Someone just mentioned, you talked about the high cost of construction and purchase of and cost of land. What about the cost of insuring those properties? that was
Well, that's another thing when it comes to climate change. Everybody wants to see the coastline, and a lot of people wants to buy property on the coastline. But if we don't have the checks and balances in place, that if you build 10 feet from the ocean and a hurricane comes and knocks your apartment building not down, but it damages it tremendously, it affects all of us. Because needless to say, in order for you to get a mortgage, you got to have insurance. So when you go and claim from your insurance, it drives the price up on all of us. It just doesn't drives up our own insurance. It's collectively, all of us pays that price.
Okay. We have another question. How does the plan address potential contamination risks over extraction and the long-term conservation of the Cayman Islands freshwater lands? Are you able to talk about that?
Well, I guess, again, back to that sort of national level, and some of the challenges is, identifying and how we interact with the waterlands. There's a tremendous amount of work that's done by the Water Authority and, overseeing that as well. But I think on a development pattern scale, we need to be more responsive to that, and let having those regulations within that particular area plan allows us to be more responsive, and it's not just simply saying, well, you're over a water lens, this is a broad brush approach. Unfortunately, the different water lenses are in different states, and different, and some need more protection than others. And and again, so we can't just have a broad brush approach that gets diluted because, well, this one is not actually being used, but we can actually respond to say, well, we have a water lens that's in an area that's viable, and we have to have greater levels of protection. And again, that's where something like an overlay would come into being versus in another area that unfortunately is no longer as viable as we would like it to be.
Okay, when we talk about freshwater lens, for those out there who may not have any idea what that is, could you explain what that is and how it affects our way of living?
Well, the freshwater lens traditionally, or the main freshwater lens or veins, we call it, is up in the eastern districts. Anytime that you cross out of Bodden Town, going all the way up to Morris Tortuga, that is the central basin for the freshwater lens.
And we're talking underground here.
Underground.
Yes.
And we have to do everything that we can to protect it because it is good water. I mean, I'll give you a prime example. I live in the Frankstown area, and when I built my house for 15 years before city water came into my district, I was on well water, and today that is as good today as it was 15 years ago. But of course, progress. You want that city water that you can just turn on. But it's extremely important that we protect our freshwater lens.
Okay. As we get ready to wrap up here, I'd like to ask each of you, starting with you, Mr. Handel, what would you like to state to the community to help ensure the creation of a successful national development?
Involvement. There is no question about it. In order for this to work, we have to have 100% involvement of all Caymanians. This is our future. We see what has happened since 1977, and we all complain, well, I can't believe that was there, or I can't believe that. Get involved, and we can create a path forward that our children and our grandchildren will say, well, you know what? Our forefathers really looked after us, and we need involvement.
Okay.
I'd just like to reiterate Mr. Handel's comments. We want to become, we need to be a society that we're not standing on the sidelines going, I can't believe that's happened. We want to be a society that says that happened as directed, as we hoped it would be. So we want to move from that sort of, well, it's happening to us, to we're creating our future.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, I think very similar to that, but very specifically, it's that written feedback. As I said, the consultation on the planning statement is open until August the 6th, and you can find the feedback form on the homepage of PlanCayman.ky. So please visit that, please access the feedback form and submit your comments, and we're kind of ready and waiting to go through those comments. So.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank you for your valuable input here today. Some of the key points and common themes that emerge during the discussion here today. We've received a wide range of perspective and insights, which are crucial for refining the planning statement and ensuring it addresses the diverse needs of our community. I'd like to emphasize the importance of the continued community engagement in the planning process. Your input, of course, you, the listening public, helps us to create a balanced approach to the development that benefits everyone here in the Cayman Islands. Thank you for participating in today's consultation. As we've been mentioning throughout, your input is crucial to shaping a sustainable future for the Cayman Islands. If you have any additional comments, we ask you to please email them to plancayman@gov.ky or visit the website, which is www.plancayman.ky. You may also complete the feedback form, which is on the homepage. You'll see it right there as you go on the website. Don't forget, for those of you who may know someone who was unavailable to join us today, that they're all welcome to join any of the upcoming public consultation meetings. We look forward to, of course, your continued participation in each district. Tonight we're going to East End, and you can find the other schedule, the schedule for the other meetings on the PlanCayman.Cayman website. Please note that the closing date for comments has been moved on the draft planning statement document to August the 6th. I'm Donna Bush. I thank you for joining us this afternoon for this important discussion. Have a great rest of the day.